Probably our biggest and boldest challenge, though, to date has been, or at least in recent years, has been Tanzania, in this project in Tanzania. Specifically, the challenge is going from this to this. And on the left side here, what you see is a picture of the typical way of gathering water resources in rural Tanzania, and that's walking down to the water source, which might be a creek or a river. In our particular community, there's really no such thing as one that's not polluted, and this is the typical way of gathering it. And hiking back up the hillside could be 2, 3, 4 hours a day, even 6 hours a day. That traditionally women spend doing this. And we're trying to get it to this point, which is water that came from a rainwater harvesting barrel, cleaner water, put into what's called a tip-tap system, which efficiently helps you wash your hands without wasting too much water. So the challenge in the community is pretty severe. There's no public water supply in Karagwe, especially in the outlying villages, and there's not going to be any public water supply for some time, and it's just not a reality. Fetching water from distant sources is a very time-consuming activity. Like I said before, 3 hours is totally reasonable to spend in a day going to gather this water. It's very difficult to. I did it a couple of years ago, and it was horrible. Culturally, this is something that women do, women and children. So it is mostly targeting one part of the community. And while women are doing this, it really prevents them from engaging in other activities such as going to school or starting a business or going to workshops and increasing their education level. Needless to say, it's a serious hurdle to development, so much so that it's what our community identified, our partners identified as being the most important hurdle. And that's why we decided to tackle this in partnership with the AllPeopleBeHappy Foundation. The good news is that the UNDP estimates that investments in clean water yield an average return of $4.40 of growth for every dollar invested. It's hard to quantify exactly what this project has done, but we're going to try to later on. The project itself, to try to simplify it, has 4 major components. One is to construct safe and clean rainwater harvesting tanks for the most vulnerable community members in Karagwe. So our partner, WMITA, identified who they thought were the most vulnerable women that were of their clients and who needed access to clean water the most. And they were the first 16, I think, to get it. 2, assist local NGOs and public outreach campaigns for SOTUS, which is a method to produce safe drinking water by basically taking old Coke bottles or water bottles and filling it with water, putting it on top of your roof for 8 hours. It actually kills 98% of parasites, and it's a much safer way to consume water. Our volunteers are doing that right now in Tanzania. That's how they drink water. Tip taps, which is a mechanism designed to encourage hand washing. That was the one picture I showed on the slide a few moments ago. And then the water harvesting tanks themselves, which we obviously are helping to build, protect, and maintain these tanks. The third part is to advocate and fundraise for water initiatives in Karagwe. For example, that video that I showed was an effort to advocate and fundraise for water issues in Karagwe. And then ultimately we also want to increase our number of volunteers to Karagwe, because our model is such that the more volunteers we have, the more funds that are going into the community for both project material cost and obviously funds injected into the community for income generating activities. So AllPeopleBeHappy's contribution has been absolutely vital over the last 3 years. Basically it's been $10,000 a year for the last 3 years. And the money was set outside to support Tanzanian site director salary. So there we have a brilliant guy right now as our site director. He is an American. It's the first time we've had an American as a site director. He is fluent in Swahili. He's a great project manager, way overqualified to be doing something like this for such a small organization like Amizade. But we've definitely seen our communication levels strengthen since he's been there. Support Amizade with costs associated with our annual water walk event, which is Again, it's happening next week. A great way for especially students in the Pittsburgh region to get involved on these issues. We've had over 1,000 students over the last 4 years. Last year alone we had 600. This year it might be a little bit of a down year. We'll see how many end up coming out. And then last but not least, ultimately put Amizade in a better position to fundraise, grow programs, and increase advocacy to make a stronger impact in the Karagwe community. So the project itself is really simple when it comes to rainwater harvesting. It's just having gutters on a roof that collects rainwater into a cistern. For a family, well, on the next slide I'll talk a little bit more in specifics about how we do it with families as compared to communities. Community tanks are just slightly different in that they're much, much bigger. One of the ones we built wouldn't fit in this room, and it would be 20 feet deeper than this room could possibly go. It involves, obviously, solar panels, and we can actually, out of the big ones, pipe it directly into school buildings or hospitals or other community centers. So the response in Karagwe for the first 2 years, the project basically was set up such that we were setting up these types of tanks, which are plastic cisterns made in China. They're nice because they're cheap, they're lightweight, and they can hold enough water for a family, of 5 or 6 people. But they also had some problems. And our community, again, what we do is community-driven service, so our community came back to us and said, hey guys, these tanks aren't necessarily working out as well as we imagined they would be. Basically, even though they're cheaper than any other way to get this much clean water at a given time, they're not, they're vulnerable to theft and vandalism. A lot of these women, their neighbors are getting jealous, and they're trying to puncture them, or they're trying to steal them. We actually had to inject some money to protect some of these tanks, and it just wasn't as sustainable as we'd hoped it was. They filled too quickly, and they weren't even big enough to last the whole dry season. So the community partner said, this might sound like the old way of doing things, but why don't we just build humongous tanks again and supply enough water for 300 or 400 people at a time? And that's exactly what we've done. It's far more expensive. This tank alone cost $18,000. This is the Chonyoyo tank that was completed last year. But it employs only local workers. There's no money that are going to the Ugandan businessmen in Taipei or the Chinese manufacturer in wherever. It employs local workers. It's only local materials, and ultimately it impacts more people and provides water year-round. So the impact by the numbers. Overall number impacted thousands, and at this point we can safely say that over 800 people a day are able to get access to clean water directly from these tanks. Large tanks built, we've now completed 2 huge ones, a third one is underway right now. Family tanks, we're up to 16, we're probably going to actually increase that number before the year's over, because we just got some new groups that are going to be visiting, and they'll be bringing their own resources. 13 of the tanks we built went directly to vulnerable survivors of gender-based human rights abuses. Our SOTUS workshop participants, we've now worked with over 100 of them. Oh, man. And we've trained over 150 people in usage of the tip taps, the little contraption that I showed you earlier. We've sent over, at this point, 69 volunteers. We'll probably go over 70 this year. That's for over 5,000 volunteer hours over the last 3 years. We've held 5 water walks in the U.S. There's 3 more this summer, which we're really excited about. That's over 1,000 water walkers. We actually also built a tree nursery as a part of the Chonyoyo water tank project, which is an exciting addition to a project when you have the ability to have clean water, or any water, irrigated into an area. You can also leverage that for fruits and vegetables and a whole slew of other great development projects. And we also, actually, with this, was able to produce a radio show on local Tanzanian radio that actually reaches over 1 million people. We called it This Tanzanian Life, and it was about water and women, and you can access it on our website if you're interested in hearing that. So other awesome impacts, we've been able to leverage these funds by over 30% through domestic fundraisers. Every $10,000 we get about from AllPeopleBeHappy, we've been able to leverage that into over $13,000 in actual project materials. For every $1 that we've gotten, over $5 have been injected into the community. And what that means is sending volunteers there, eating food, paying for lodging, you name it. It's the income generating activities that are going on in this community would not have been possible without these grants. We've increased our volunteers by 125% in the last 3 years. That's a shocking number to me because it looked as if that wasn't going to happen last year. We're having a particularly good year right now, though. Then, of course, harder to quantify is the transformation that our volunteers have gone through. Without question, they're incredible advocates for these water issues.